Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming and welcome. This is part of the Friends of the National Park Service lecture, the second Thursday lectures. And we're going to have a panel today, a discussion panel. And our topic is conservation and preservation, archival, energy, and architectural resources in the Virgin Islands and in Denmark. And first of all, let me introduce the panelists. We have Anne Volbom, who's sitting here in the front. She is the president of the Danish West Indian Society in Denmark. She has been president since 2003. She is also initiating some funding that she has gotten, that the Danish West Indian Society has gotten, for 8 papers to be presented for the March 31st, 2017 program. So we're very excited about that. There's going to be 4 papers from over the other side of the Atlantic and 4 papers from this side of the Atlantic. And they're going to be in St. Thomas, St. Thomas, St. Croix, and in Copenhagen. So look for these, for information about these forthcoming papers. The next person.
So much help.
Thank you. All this help. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh wow. All right. The next, Bob Boyton.
Yes.
Yes. He is our next speaker, the discussion speaker. He and his wife Gail. Both of you stand up, please. They're travelers for the first time to Denmark. They came back with some very good experiences, what they saw, what they heard in Copenhagen, and they went to Sweden as well. And so they're going to tell us about a few of those things that have to do with conservation and preservation. The next is Deville. Deville Lass is an architect. He has his own architectural firm here on Queen Street. He is also the Vice President of the Transfer Day Committee, and he is on the Historic Preservation Committee, and he is also on the National Preservation Committee. Okay? So he'll tell you more about that and about the projects that he is going to do with that. So, and I am going to be the moderator, and I am president of Danish Society of the Virgin Islands Historians. And the Society of Virgin Islands Historians has been formed in 30 years, but we're not celebrating it yet. We're going to celebrate it 2017. We're going to have a conference this Saturday at the St. George Botanical Gardens, and there are 2 speakers. One is Sarah Meyer-Holm, and she'll be speaking about the deaconesses. The deaconesses were the nurses who came to Queen Louise home and served there until 1917. And our other speaker is Pernilla Ibsen, and she is. She is originally from Denmark, and she is now teaching at the University of Wisconsin. She teaches history and women's gender studies. She has written a book, The Daughters of the Trade, Atlantic Slavers in Interracial Marriage on the Gold Coast, and it's published by the University of Pennsylvania Press. You can get it on Amazon.com, and she will be speaking Saturday on her book, portions of her book. So we look forward to that. Now, with Norwegian Airlines here, and it is a real boon to St. Croix. Norwegian Airlines, with its direct flight from Copenhagen, Puerto Rico, and St. Croix, we have an influx of Danish travelers, and you can see them. Everywhere you go, you see Danish travelers, and the best way to know whether they're Danish or American is footwear. Okay? Footwear, Americans with their sneakers and white socks, Danes with their sandals. They're sturdy, practical sandals. Okay, I've been told that. So with all this interest of Danes coming here, interest in Norwegian Airlines is unlike the other Bravo tours. They're going to take people from here to Denmark. Wonderful. Usually took 23 hours to get through Miami, through London, through to Copenhagen. Now it takes, what, 10, 11 hours to go on Norwegian. So there is great hope that there will be interest in Denmark at the same time. Denmark is an independent country, and what we're going to do tonight cannot be compared to St. Croix, because that's comparing oranges and apples, all right? So we're comparing Denmark to the United States, two independent countries, and to learn from both sides. Denmark's socialism is something that we can all admire. I think everybody can say something about it. Candidate Bernie Sanders of Vermont hopes to make higher education more affordable, equalize pay for all, and allow health care to more individuals. In the US, this way of thinking may be called progressive socialism, and we all know that this is the first Democratic debate. He announced this, and his opponent, Hillary Clinton, laughed off his ideas saying, "This is not Denmark." But let's look at, tonight we're going to look at Denmark and see what things we can do with Denmark. All right? Okay, here is the traditional picture that we think of Denmark. The sturdy buildings, the yellow brick, the buildings that were made on the profits of sugar, rum, and molasses. All right, so the first one is the Admiralty building, part of the naval system of the country. And this building here is probably the more important, is the Danish West Indian warehouse. All right, where all the rum, sugar, and molasses came to the wharf there and was stored in the warehouse. So these are the sturdy buildings that visitors to Denmark are very accustomed to. Presently, the renovation, rehabilitation of the buildings, the Admiralty building is a hotel. The warehouse is a museum, an antique statues museum. In the last 15 years, the most notable building in Copenhagen is the Black Diamond. And I've chosen this picture because this is the former library, Royal Library here, and this is the new Royal Library. So we have in Copenhagen architecture that is really reflects art, and so the the Black Diamond is on the harbor side there. Has a very lovely landscape. This is from Anne Ballboom's kitchen. This is the first thing I looked at the morning that I woke up. She always had a beautiful view of the three spires, of the three downtown churches. This is what her view is now. A massive construction within Copenhagen is unbelievable. And all I can say is they have probably reverberated bounced back from the 2008 recession faster than the U.S. did. Right? So there has been an explosion of building. This is Amager, which is an island off of Copenhagen town. It was a flat island with very little building on it. This is Copenhagen city here. This is the airport, the airplane, and a whole lot and fusion of new buildings are apartments. And the apartments are made as artwork as well. And so we have a figure 8 apartment. This is called the figure 8 apartment. And it's different from architecture from the past. The yellow brick is not being used. Concrete is being used. Open areas for lots of sun, because we know that the sun is not always in the northern climates. So the wonderful morning with sun. The buildings have lots of open windows, big plate glass windows. The buildings, the rooms inside are wall-less. All right, so from one room to the other, there are no walls except the bathroom, of course. But the new style is to have wall-less rooms, to have, so everybody has a porch with the sun in front of their house, and these are the things that the Danes like. Who's having all this apartments? Well, the thing is that as soon as students graduate from university, they are desirous of remaining in Copenhagen, right? Why? Because of all of the stimulation within the city. Different theaters and ballet groups and exhibits and galleries and so forth. So everybody is wanting to stay in the city now. And I think this is a conversion from the 1950s and 60s where everybody was going out to the suburbs, moving from a city to the suburbs and having a one-family house, having a lot of land, and having your own, driveway and street and so forth and so on. The change in Copenhagen, and I imagine it's in the United States as well, is to remain in the cities. So that's one. All right. So that gives you a little overview. The reuse of old buildings, the rehabilitation of old buildings. We have the new architecture blending in with the old, and to meet new needs of younger people who are coming up now and are having jobs and want to live in the city. Okay, so that is architectural resources in Denmark. All right, thank you. Anna Baldwin, who is going to talk about energy in Denmark. Yeah. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It was really a nice introduction to me. Suddenly I could see the 2 months I've been without the view from my kitchen window. I'm talking about energy, but I'm also talking very much about garbage. But I have often been asked if the Danes still had the islands, what would be different in St. Croix? And I always say the amount of potholes would be much smaller. Number 2 thing, which is I think is really important, is all streets would have a name. So you could use the GPS system. And lately I've been thinking that the garbage system you have already, I don't know, which exists here, would have been extremely different from. And I will tell about how it is, how I see it from my point of view in Denmark. I live in Copenhagen, you see that. I live really in the town, in the center. I live in an old building from the 1875. I live on the 5th floor, so it's high up. I don't have I walk up and down the stairs. And I have lived in the same building since the 70s. And for a long time, it was only, I went down with my garbage into big containers. That was that. The containers seemed to be bigger and bigger from when I was small. There were smaller containers, now the containers are huge. People produce more garbage today than they used to. But then the sorting of garbage. Number 1 thing we should do was to take all newspapers and all papers and keep it separate and put it in a special container which has a small, you slide it in, small hole. The next was carpet, because in our building there are some shops and they get a lot of things which are in big boxes and so on. All those boxes took so much space up. So we got special containers for carpet. Then I think at the same time there came something about chemicals. If you had a lot of paints you want to throw out, you didn't do that, then you had to go and do it in a special place, not in my backyard. Sometimes there would come a small car around in the neighborhood. You knew what time it would come, you could go with your garbage, with your chemical waste. And then all of a sudden there was a small container, very small, for batteries. So no more batteries together with all the rest of the garbage. Already then we had a special container for glass. Not glass in our backyard, but in the neighbor street, a big corner where a lot of shops are in that neighborhood. People go with their bottles and marmalade glasses and so on. The next very new thing is small electrical stuff which you want to get rid of. Could be old phones, old laptops, old just the keyboard, electric lines, everything like that. You just throw in this special small deep container. And the last thing we have is hard plastic. And when I started to do that, I realized how much hard plastic I've been thrown out through my whole life. And it's sort of, wow, why didn't we do that before? Because a lot of food you buy are in hard plastic. And here, when I've been staying here for more than a month, I realized I throw out so much here, so much hard plastic, which I would never have done it in Denmark. And then there is, of course, all the rest. And what do we do with that? Yeah, we have these big containers, yes. And then they are emptied every week. And what happens to them? Where do they go? They go into ovens, or one oven. One huge oven. And the building is so big you cannot imagine it. We have these kind of special ovens which are built to use the energy from the heat of when the garbage is burned. We have 26 of them in Denmark, spread all over the countryside. They're not privately owned, they're owned by the municipality. So somehow we are all in my municipal, it's a municipal who owns together, not only one, several municipals own a plant together. I would like to give an example in Roskilde. Roskilde is a town which had 50,000 people, which is something like the inhabitants of St. Paul. It's a very old town. It's known for the Museum of the Viking ships, and also the Cathedral of Roskilde is on UNESCO's World Heritage List. It's where all the Danish kings and queens are buried, almost always. They have this new build, which is huge building. You can see it from the train, so it's bigger than the cathedral. And it's very sort of red, artistic looking, as if some sort of lace have been put over big concrete something, which looks interesting. When you go by, you say, what is this? And then, yeah, that's nice. That oven gives electricity to 60,000 homes, and it also gives heat to 45,000 homes. And they don't have enough garbage, so they import garbage. The garbage comes from the UK, from England, from Ireland, from Scotland. There the garbage comes in big ships, especially made for garbage. And already that English garbage have been sorted, so a lot of things have been taken out of that garbage. So it's food leftovers and milk containers and whatever. I can say in general, in Denmark, we reuse almost 50% of our garbage. And the rest we burn and in these special big ovens, which make all this energy. There's probably a few percent which sort of are wasted somewhere, but our goal is that we'll never have anywhere where all the garbage would be thrown. So it's good for Denmark, but if you look at the future, I think that the archaeologists are sad about that, because archaeologists always have loved garbage from ancient time. So that is the only thing about this way we do things that's bad. But otherwise, I really like the more I read about it, the more I like the way we do with the garbage. And I hope this could inspire you to maybe to ask for another garbage situation, if I can say that, here in the islands.
Export it to Denmark.
Well, why don't you use now or Hesse's farm, and there's all this industrial area which is not really being used. Why don't you build a huge oven and import garbage from all the other islands who are not clever enough to figure that out? And then you can have rubber bills which would be different from the one you have now. Think about that.
Thank you, Anna. Now we have Bob Boynton.
Good evening. I don't know if I need the mic or not. I usually don't use the mic because I have a pretty loud voice, but I will use it tonight.
What was that?
I guess I'll use the mic. That's good. I'm not Danish and I'm not from Denmark, but they asked me to speak about Denmark tonight and about some of the technological advances that I found when I was there for the 18 days that Gail and I spent there during July and August of this past year. If you've ever flown into Denmark, the first thing you're going to notice is a lot of water. The next thing you notice is a little bit of land, and then you're going to see some wind turbines. And out of the aircraft window in one spot, I counted 50 wind turbines in the shallow waters just off Denmark. So when they asked me to talk about technology, I did a little research on wind turbines in Denmark. In 2014, they had installed 5,250 wind turbines in Denmark, supplying 30% of all the electrical needs of the country on a daily basis. Anna just said they were doing 50%, I think, of all the, or they were doing all of the electricity for 50,000 people with a garbage disposal facility. And this leads on to a couple of other things that I will mention to you. In one day, in the past year, they produced 116% of all the electricity that they needed in Denmark from the wind turbines. And another day during the week, they had 160% of all the electricity they needed to operate Denmark in one day. What they did was sell this extra electricity to both Norway and Germany, and then Sweden took 20% of it because those three countries have a facility to store their electricity to use at a later date. And I decided to take a look at that point then on what we're doing in the United States to compare the United States to what Denmark has done. And And in looking at the United States, I find out that we're about 55.9 times larger than Denmark. Denmark has a population of a little over 5 million people. We have a little over 318 million people in the United States. So if we're 55% larger than Denmark, and Denmark is supplying 30% of the electricity they need through wind turbines, then what are we doing here in the United States? So I did some research on the number of turbines that were in operation in the United States and found out that 49 million people are now using electricity in the United States that is created by wind turbines. Now if I compare this with some other statistics, that comes out to be about 0.014% of all the Americans in the United States are getting electricity from wind turbines, whereby 30% of all the electricity in Denmark is being supplied by turbines. I know that Denmark now has over 6,000 turbines installed, and they have an obligation to create 50% of all electricity required in Denmark through wind turbines by 2020. Our goal is to be 2030, I believe, and we're looking at like 10% of all people in the United States to be given electricity by wind turbines. So they're much more advanced as far as supplying electricity through usable energy. Also, you'll notice traveling around Denmark that there are a lot of solar panels. Recently, I understand the government just put into effect an interconnect which allows people who have solar panels to create electricity in their homes to provide electricity through the interconnect, which is stored electricity, and they can then get it back free of charge at a later date, eliminating batteries, as we know have to be used here on island and in the United States if we're going to use solar power. Because then we store it in batteries, so when the sun isn't out, we have electricity. With this interconnect, people are allowed to use, they are provided electricity back to them through the government. So they're much more advanced as far as I'm concerned in solar power and how it's used in the country. Going back a little bit on construction, it was talked about the new construction in Denmark, and Betsy did talk about it. If you notice, that first building was all black, and I'm sure it's all black because black absorbs heat, and that helps heat the building. Most of all, the new construction that you'll see in Denmark uses solar panels or has solar panels installed or solar windows put into them, and some of them, even the glass buildings, are set up in such a way so that they get a lot of heat and warmth from the sun in Denmark when you need it in the winter months. I also thought it was quite interesting that a lot of bicycles are used in Copenhagen. I think everyone in Copenhagen owns a bicycle. I have never seen so many people on bicycles in my life ever. And now I find out that both Amsterdam and Denmark are the two largest cities in the world where bicycles are more important than vehicles. The airport has double-deck stacks for bicycles, so that people, not the airport, I'm sorry, the train station, so that they actually stack one bicycle on top of another, because there are so many bicycles that are left off by the people. They actually have bike routes on every main street in Copenhagen. A bike route in Copenhagen is 6 to 8 feet wide, and it's a path that's between the sidewalk and the street. So if a cab comes by to let you off, they let you off on the outside of the bicycle path, and you have to go through the bicycle path to get to the sidewalk. And in doing so, you better not step off the sidewalk in Denmark and go into an intersection without looking for a bicycle where you might be run over by one. Because we were almost a couple of times, it's very difficult to think bicycle when you step off the curb. They have plans for 189 miles of bicycle paths in Copenhagen in the next couple of years. And most people do ride bicycles. You'll see people riding bicycles to work, people ride bicycles to events, they ride bicycles everywhere in Copenhagen. And I think that just has to do with the attitude and the philosophy of green, because it's much cheaper to ride a bicycle and much more effective to ride a bicycle than to drive a car. So you'll find very small cars in Copenhagen and in Denmark. You'll find electric trains in Denmark and Copenhagen. You'll find lots of bicycles in that area. And you'll find a bus transportation system that is very, very effective, and a lot of people ride the bus. Buses also will take a bicycle because you can actually wheel it into the side of the bus. The door is open, the bus lays down close to the curb, so you step from the curb directly into the bus. And I think they're very interested in doing more green in Denmark. The last subject that I was asked to talk about is dry urinals. However, before I do, I'm going to tell you a joke. I'll give you a joke that I heard recently, and then I'll get into the last subject. The joke goes like this. A man here in Christiansted, who lived on the island, had a very important meeting here in Christiansted, and he was late for the meeting and got to the public parking lot and found that there were no parking places. So he drove around frantically for 5 minutes looking for a parking place and could not find one, and he knew he couldn't find one on the street. Well, he had decided that he should go to church more often in the coming year, and so he looked up above and he said, Lord, if you'll help me find a parking place, I promise you I will go to church every Sunday for the rest of my life. And just at that moment, a lady pulled out of a parking place right in front of him. He pulled in and he looked up and said, just forget it, don't pay attention to what I just said. That's what I'd like to do about talking about dry urinals, because I'd like to forget about it. But dry urinals are used quite effectively, especially in public places in Copenhagen, and I'm sure throughout Denmark. Now for the ladies, a dry urinal looks just like a standard urinal, except that it doesn't have fresh water coming into it. In its place, they have put a filter down in the urinal itself that filters out all the impurities and all the odors, and then the water just simply goes out through this present sewage system, so you're using no water to flush. I just calculated if you use 8 ounces of water to flush, and those dry urinals are worth 7,000 flushes, that leaves you about 375 gallons of water that is not required to flush the dry urinal. So they're very effectively used, they're easy to clean. They're supposed to be 5% less bacteria created because you aren't putting water in with the urine, and therefore they're easier to clean and easier to maintain. I thought while I was on this subject, I'd talk about tankless toilets. Tankless toilets are quite effectively used now in new buildings in Copenhagen. And that just means they took the tank off the toilet and mount the toilet directly to a wall. So it's not mounted to the floor. There's a button above it that you push to flush it, and water comes directly out of the pipeline through the toilet. So it's not gravity fed, it's pressured through your water line that flows through the toilet. Since it's not mounted to the floor, it's easy to maintain because the floor is empty underneath it, so you can easily swab the floor. It is mounted directly to the wall, and you do not have a tank. You don't have parts to wear out in the flushing mechanism, so it's more effective to operate and uses less water. All in all, I think Denmark is ahead of the United States in a lot of things they do. I think we should take some heed on what they're doing there, and I think we could be much more energy efficient in this country if we use the technology we have. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't. We have one wind turbine that I know of here in Moraine that was installed, about 6 months ago now. Now, I don't know this for a fact. I'll just put some figures out to you that I was told by the gentleman who installed it. They were paying WAPA bills of about $60,000 a month in that area. They put in 2 new wells for water. They put in 1 wind terminal. The wind terminal cost them $750,000. They got $350,000 back in rebates. So now you've got a $400,000 investment that'll pay for itself in 3 years. At the end of the 3 years, he will supply WAPA with $3,000 to $6,000 worth of electricity a month that he will not need that wind turbine is generating. So they're very efficient and effective to operate. He told me that the only maintenance on that turbine is that it has to be greased once a year. Somebody has to walk up there and put grease in the mechanism to keep it free floating as the wind blows. I hope that I've given you some information about Denmark. I told you before, I'm not Danish, I'm an American. They asked me to do this, and I told them I would, and I appreciate you listening, and I hope you learned something about Denmark.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you. All right, and now we have Javil Larson.
Good evening, everyone. Let's see if I can. Yeah, maybe I can bring it up closer. I'm just trying to. I'm a short guy, so getting from point A to point B can be a little difficult, which I have to man the images as we see. Okay, so my name is Javil Larson. So I'm a local preservation architect in general. And I have many hats. I sit on the St. Croix Historic Preservation Committee, which supervises and is in charge of making sure that the historical features and the aesthetics of our historic towns are preserved. So we're stewards of these towns. They're very important to our livelihood in many ways because it really is a representation of who we are. If we don't sort of preserve the past, we have issues about where we're going in the future. So therefore, having these committees and these historic districts are very important to the territory and to the world as some of this journey that I'll describe in a few minutes. I also sit on the VI Transfer Centennial Commission. In 2017, it will be 100 years under American rule. We are planning a commemoration for these events. It's a milestone, it's important. It's important to the people of the Virgin Islands and to the world. We are gearing up to do many things. We have an executive director that's going to be announced pretty shortly, a website, many things that are happening along those lines. And then also I do work with, as a VI advisor to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So these all are sort of intertwined. But what I'm going to present to you tonight is a journey of this collaboration between the U.S. Virgin Islands and Denmark in doing projects that benefit the preservation and conservation of our cultural resources. It's something that we have to really sort of embrace as a community, and it's across all boards, all ethnicities, because if we're not really preserving our past, we really don't have a future, at least in terms of how I see it. So I'm going to start out, as you can see, with some maps. Of course, on the lower left is the U.S. Virgin Islands. Above you have the United States, Denmark, the Caribbean, and Africa. So to start, obviously, this 100-year commemoration is about the Virgin Islands and the U.S. But also, to really describe this experience, we have to include all the different components and all the parts of the world that make us today who we are. So this is why it encompasses all the maps. But of course, today we're going to be talking about the relationship between Denmark and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Certain things are not coming up, but that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to start with the VITA program. And what's interesting, and I put a very big picture of Ulla Lund, who's a preservation architect from Denmark, and she'd probably be mortified that I've done this, but that's my experience with her, meeting her back in 2000. So we're talking over 15 years ago. Ulla had been coming to the Virgin Islands for a while. She is a preservation architect, like I said, works with a lot of Danish foundations in Denmark and does a lot of restoration work there. So she came here and she saw how many cultural resources, all these beautiful buildings and just a landscape that was such a rich place. And it had a legacy and connection to Denmark. So she was just, flabbergasted in terms of sometimes seeing the conditions of the buildings that we have here. And what her question when she went to practitioners like myself, architects and carpenters and masons that existed here, to find out what were the traditions that we were using to preserve these buildings. Were we using good techniques, bad techniques? Was it hard to find a real master carpenter? Was it hard to find a blacksmith? And really, in the past, we used to have a lot more of these individuals within our community. And they've sort of waned because, modern technologies, have a different philosophy about construction, and maybe not the strong aesthetic about preserving and recycling buildings. just wasn't occurring. So you'd find pockets of people who could do stuff, but not in the volume that we need. Because these buildings, there's a lot of buildings here that could use that type of expertise. And it's not a temporal thing that's a one-time shot. You fix it up, but then you gotta fix it up again. I mean, it's a cycle, which is in anything. You have to preserve, you gotta keep working at it. So the idea was, let's create this Virgin Islands Danish apprenticeship program and get local people involved, especially the youth, and they would get trained from these experts from Denmark. And she had the pool of these craftsmen, and that tradition is very strong and continues in Denmark, to bring them here to train, and then we'd have this pool of people that could start doing this work. So she has a love of Frederiksted. So as you can imagine, Fort Frederick was prime on her radar, and she's like, we're gonna do some restoration work here. And the pictures begin to show you. The one in the corner with the two guys in the niches is the final product. But you can see, you know, the damaged plaster was taken off the rubble walls, and then they were restored. The skill set was so good that they even went to Fort Christian in St. Thomas and Charlotte Amalie and did work there. As you can see, the bricklayers doing some point work. And then it wasn't just the young people that were being trained. We actually had practitioners. We had architects, we had draftsmen, we had painters, we had contractors, local blacksmiths that came and also trained with these experts from Denmark. So you started to have this dialogue about kind of building traditions and methodologies that weren't necessarily practiced from the past, that were now being sort of brought to the plate, and techniques that, such as you see Senator Jackson painting the red shutter, even the methodologies of paint, which were traditional oil-based handmade painting, which actually has a longer lifespan than the latex paint. You had another method of doing the same kind of work. So all of a sudden now you can have kind of practitioners who could talk differently, not just having one solution, one methodology of let's say, painting a shutter. We could use different techniques. Another interesting part of the experience is that some of these older traditions of what we call building arts actually are a lot less caustic to the environment. So if you're starting to use really kind of linseed oil-based paints, they don't have the volatile organic compounds that many of the modern paints have. So when you go sort of back to the methods and the building arts traditions, you're actually doing things that are healthier for your environment and healthier for the building. So it has a real positive effect that could be applied to present-day construction even. Here's examples of the blacksmithing, and then here on my right is a collection of the Danes that were trained and the young people with some of the adults. So unfortunately in 2006 the program sort of died, and it died for multiple reasons. There wasn't enough financial support anymore, and the complexity of bringing people from Denmark and the visas and et cetera, and there was basically no funding that allowed it to continue. Although we were in the process of sending even locals to Denmark to get trained, and they were coming back and had some wonderful expertise that could be applied to the territory, but it waned. But it didn't die, because in 2011, there was a real interesting symposium that was done at the National Museum in Denmark in May. And basically we're looking at the US Virgin Islands and Denmark and talking about our mutual heritage. And it was a platform that really began to speak about this 2017 celebration that was upcoming, and basically how we could do projects that could be unified, that could benefit the Virgin Islands for that commemoration. And in that, we had a lot of discussion, not only from the cultural arts, but the archival issues, where Denmark has a lot of historical artifacts from the US Virgin Islands, and how we could bring that back if we had a facility that could house it. So there was a really rich discussion about ideas, and it sort of had planted a seed in people in government and even in Denmark, that maybe there's something that we need to kind of explore about how things and projects could come about here in the territory. So we've gone from 2011 now into 2013, and I'm going to go into the town of Christiansted directly, because at that point in time, the VI Economic Development Authority and Enterprise Zone did what was labeled town hall meetings. And we were at a point in the town of Christiansted where the town itself was having some real issues. There's decline, we have attrition of businesses, people were moving out of the town, and it was becoming, and as you can see, to some degree, becoming a ghost town. So in order to figure out how we kind of transform and revitalize and change it from a sort of not burgeoning town anymore, what could we do to make that transformation? And we wanted to make sure that the community would be involved, that the people who are the stakeholders who live in the town of Christiansted actually came out and talked about all the issues that they were experiencing. And through these town hall meetings, a charrette was created, a competition to how to revitalize the town of Christiansted. Now, I have a picture here taken by Ted Davis, which is a beautiful aerial photograph of the town. And from afar, the town looks stunning. It is a stunning town. Unfortunately, when you get into certain parts of the town, you see the blight, you see demolition by neglect, you see things that need to be corrected. So I was the winning entry for the town plan in 2013. And the yellow demarcation of the town is actually the historic National Federal Historic District. The blue line is what is the overlapped enterprise zone. So the town was looked at and the people spoke. It was juried, and then the community had a popular public vote. And the content and components of the town were selected. And it's a very collection of different things that are being promoted in this town plan. Primarily, it is to bring back people to live in the town. The town was, at its capacity, was about 5,000 people, and presently it's about 2,200 people living in the town. So it's anemic. It needs people to come back and live in the town. It also needs economic commerce, and needs some hotels, it needs some parking areas, and this plan, which is on my website, has a series of these components, which you can look at. Here their components are listed, but the one I want to really describe tonight is where this project is going to kind of gel. And this idea of making Christiansted a college town and having a university component is actually a catalyst to help bring the town back to life. And what is being presented and being worked out between Denmark and the US Virgin Islands is a School of Architecture and Building Arts. So Ola, again, being very savvy about how to kind of get the buy-in from Denmark. In 2015, in March, there's a group called BUFO, which is an association of owners of historic houses in Denmark, very influential group with the means and the connections in the government. And they came down and did a tour of both St. Croix and St. Thomas. I had no idea who they were. I was told these people are coming, take them on a tour, show them around, make sure you take them up into the areas that typically people don't go and see. I said, not a problem, I'll show them what they need to see. So they came down, they were very personable, they walked through the towns. These are people that travel throughout Denmark, but also to many other former owner places that Denmark owned in India and Africa. And these are people that are very savvy in terms of the cultural resources, and they're really keen about preserving what was done with Denmark in the location that they were at the time. As in this case, in the US Virgin Islands, this built history that is very important. They were really blown away in terms of what we have here. They were obviously a little taken aback at what some of the condition of the buildings, but they really sort of got the message. So of course, at that point when they went back to Denmark, they said, we have to do some projects here in this territory because these buildings are extremely important and they need to be restored. So Senator Myron Jackson, as one of the efforts, and he's a commission member on the Via Transfer Commission, came up with the idea of this In Search of Identity and talking about what makes us who we are here in the Virgin Islands. And this whole idea was adopted by the VI Transfer Commission. And these two projects that we're about to look at, and specifically one at Christiansted, is a In Search of Identity project that is being sanctioned and promoted between us. So there are two projects. So one is in Charlotte-Amalie, and the other is in Christiansted. So the Jarvis School, which is on my left, number 1, is going to be a museum, a Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands Museum, and also a school for conservation. And that is going to be done in Charlotte-Amalie, and it's being viewed as this art corridor, and there will be art classes and some other stuff tied to it, but it's a pretty big compound in on the basically behind where Government House is in Charlotte-Amalie. It's a beautiful old school, basically an elementary school, and it's all brick, all a Danish designed compound that's extremely stunning. And then the property, which is number 2, which is the old barracks building that you see sort of boarded up with trees growing out of it. Clearly, this property is going to need a lot of TLC to be brought back. What you will be seeing in the next couple of weeks is that the trees are going to be carefully removed, and I will explain what will be happening. But there's movement on this exact property, and this will be the new University of Virgin Islands School of Architecture and Building Arts. Because if we're really going to be serious of creating a movement to preserve our cultural resources, we have to have the talent here. And I'm not saying that we do not exist, but we need to do not only the present group of people that are skilled to do the kind of work that preservation and conservation requires, but the next generation and the generations after that. And the only way to do that is to have a school of higher learning that can teach us how to properly take care of our properties, our cultural resources. So just to be clear about what this partnership is, and of course Denmark wants it to be a real partnership. They're not giving us free money without us putting some money down on the table. So the idea is that this is a $20 million investment. It's $10 million that is going to be raised by Denmark, and then we have to raise $10 million. The idea is that clearly $10 million is going to be a partial seed money from the Kingdom of Denmark, and we will, here in the U.S. territory, will also do a seeding, a smaller portion of that money, and then we're also going to get engaged with the federal government as another investor, hopefully through the U.S. Economic Development Authority. We are going to also look at Danish foundations, because the way development works in Denmark is the government seeds something, usually a relatively small amount of money, and then the funding can be, the extra funding comes from other Danish foundations and private foundations. Our mix on this half, on this side of the Atlantic, will be slightly different, but the idea is that both of us will be kind of equally doing monies that will make the project happen. Now we're realistic, because if we can't get the full amount, both projects are looked at in phases. So as much money as we can generate per phase, this is the development goal that we will achieve, and then we will continue raising money to basically keep developing the property to the point where we get to where we need to get to. What's interesting in this whole exercise, specifically for our School of Architecture here in Anse Croix Christiansted, is that we are going to be partnering with Aarhus University School of Architecture. And it was really interesting because we went in October of 2015 to Denmark, and we met with the schools. We gave them the idea. They were really interested in doing so. And now they are our partners working with UVI to establish this school here in the territory. The Royal Academy of Fine Arts School of Architecture is going to be the partner in the St. Thomas project. So we have two premier schools of Denmark, architecture schools in Denmark, who are going to be coming to the Virgin Islands in February next month to do measured technical drawings of both facilities. When I went to Denmark and I saw the caliber of the work and the methodologies they use to actually do this kind of measuring, it was something that I had never seen before, to a level and degree that I had never seen before. It is an extremely authentic, to the last brick, they will measure, and we will have a document that is actually a extremely rich base that we can then develop the actual school from a real point of view, and development and cost. What the students, we're having students come in February with the professors. It's going to be 15 students on St. Croix and 15 in St. Thomas. And they're going to have GPS total stations, and they're going to do this very accurate measurement. The following months, when they go back to Denmark, they will be doing studios where they will then reinterpret the functions of a museum in St. Thomas and the architectural school here in St. Croix. At the end of this whole process, the idea is that we will have these real interesting formal documents that then can be paired with actual professionals here to then physically go about getting these two properties rebuilt and restored and having these schools in place. This is a long-term effort. Obviously, it's not going to be ready for 2017, but this is really the beginning, start of what I hope is a real preservation movement that's going to kind of re-energize our towns and get people interested in the idea of conservation of our historic buildings. We have many partners at this present date, which is up on the screen right now, including different agencies in the VI government and private foundations, the architectural schools, UFO, and the University of the Virgin Islands. Just to kind of wrap this up, you see the site. This is the actual Department of Education compound. That's who is the actual owner of the property. It's in the process of being transferred to the University of the Virgin Islands. The historic building is the ruin, and the building with the red roof to the right. This is what will become the architectural school. Now, what's really interesting and dynamic, and why this will become a college town, is the University of the Virgin Islands is also pursuing a maritime institute. And that would also be placed here in the town of Christiansted. So you'll have the architectural school within that defined red area, and this maritime institute of UVI on the yellow portion. So you have two large university components that will be basically being placed downtown here in Christiansted. Now, this was what the old barracks was purported to be about 10 years ago, when it was going to be the offices of the Lieutenant Governor. That project was scrapped, but now it's being reinterpreted to now become the School of Architecture and Building Arts. And as I described before, this is actually the whole compound that we're defining. Now, in terms of what will come from this, is not only students that are trained to become professional architects, we also see it as a school that can then train local draftsmen, contractors, builders in these techniques. So we're trying to elevate the bar. So hopefully we'll get better designers, and we'll get better products, and we'll see things that really kind of blend with the cultural resources and the built environment in a better way. The Maritime Institute clearly would also be another vehicle to get young people trained in boating skills, from boat repair to engine repair, etc. So it's going to be a real great catalyst for the town. These are the two schools from Denmark. And finally, this is the group, the gang, the partnership that we are working with from Denmark and from here to make this happen. I just want to wrap up by saying that these are real, serious efforts. We put a lot of time and effort into this. We are committed, but we also need the community to really sort of get behind these projects and to support us in getting these projects off the ground. Even if it's a small donation, even if it's calling your center and saying we want to see this happen, see the governor say, hey, we're people from the town of Christiansted, this is our community, we want to see it come back to life. This is a real viable project, it's a start point. We want you to push this forward. We really have to work together as a community to make sure that these things happen. Many people here, and I've seen this a lot, and we have many issues with probate in the town itself, with multiple owners, etc. But I wanted to just make a very clear point. Although you may have a legal piece of paper that says you're the owner, what we really are always is a steward. We're a steward of these historic properties that have been here for 200 to 350 years. If we take the right methodologies and the practices to preserve them and conserve them, they will, again, live another 350 years, way past anyone who's sitting before us right now. We can't say we are just the owner of the property, we're just taking care of it for the next generation. So we've got to sort of shift the mindset, shift it in a sense that we are not just looking at it as a asset that we could leave basically to fall down because we own it and we have it like that. We really have to take it to the next level and to make sure that we are actually doing something with these buildings, whether it's boarding them up, shoring them up, opening them up, painting them, repairing them, maintaining them, putting people in them. When we sort of embrace that philosophy, I think this town and all our historic towns will come back to life and it will benefit all of us, not only today, but for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gill. I want to thank all of our panel members very much for all the information that they have imparted to all of us. It's much for us to think about.